A baby boy just 6 months old named Seo-jun, the only son and heir of King Minute Jae, the most feared mafia boss in South Korea, whose empire controlled $800 million in shipping ports and underground casinos, and whose single word could end political careers or entire bloodlines, was wasting away like a dying candle despite receiving the most advanced pediatric care that absolute power and unlimited wealth could buy in Seoul. And his father, a man known as the Iron King, who had built his criminal empire without showing mercy or weakness for 15 brutal years, had desperately flown the child to more than 10 different specialists, from pediatric gastroenterologists at Seoul National University Hospital to metabolic disease experts at Samsung Medical Center, from nutritional specialists at Asan Medical Center to geneticists at the most exclusive private clinics in Gangnam, spending over 3 billion won in consultations and experimental treatments. Yet not a single one of these world-renowned doctors could explain why this baby, who appeared to eat normally and showed no clear symptoms of genetic disorders or organ failure, kept losing weight day after day until his tiny body became skeletal, his skin like pale parchment, his breathing shallow and weak. But when Maya Thompson, a 29-year-old American pediatric nurse who had taken a contract position at a modest private clinic in Itaewon after her own hospital in Brooklyn closed, a woman buried under $180,000 in student loans who lived in a cramped efficiency apartment and worked double shifts just to afford her sole rent, was hired almost by chance after Minute Jae's head of security remembered how this sharp-eyed, fearless nurse had once spotted a medication error that saved his nephew's life during a routine visit. In a moment, kindly subscribe to this channel. The nursery on the 3rd floor of the Gangnam Fortress had become a tomb dressed in pastel blue. King Minute Jae stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection a dark silhouette against the Seoul skyline, watching the city he owned with blood and fear while behind him, machines beeped their useless rhythms around his dying son. Seo-jun lay in a crib that cost more than most people's cars, surrounded by monitors that tracked every breath, every heartbeat, every microscopic change in his failing body. The baby's chest rose and fell with the terrible fragility of tissue paper in wind. 6 months old. He should have been fat and laughing, grabbing at toys, rolling over. Instead, his ribs cast shadows on his translucent skin, and his eyes, when they opened, held a dimness that made Minute Jae's hands shake. The test results from Dr. Shin arrived. Sir Choi Dae-sung, his right hand for 12 years, spoke from the doorway with the careful voice men used around grief they didn't understand. He consulted with the team at Johns Hopkins. They found nothing. Nothing. The word that had become a knife twisted daily into Minute Jae's chest. He had built an empire on certainty, on control, on the absolute power to make reality bend to his will. He could have a man disappeared before sunrise. He could move 50 million won with a text message. He could make politicians weep and prosecutors retire early. But he couldn't stop his son from vanishing gram by gram, day by day, like smoke through his fingers. How much did we pay Shin? Minute Jae's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone that usually preceded violence. 80 million won for the consultation. Another 120 million for the genetic testing panel and the metabolic workup. 200 million won to be told nothing was wrong. The baby was eating. The baby was producing waste. The baby's organs functioned. The baby was dying anyway, and the most expensive minds in Korean medicine shrugged their educated shoulders and suggested more tests, more time, more money, as if Minute Jae hadn't already given them everything but his soul. He turned from the window and walked to the crib. Seo-jun's tiny hand, barely thicker than Minute Jae's thumb, curled reflexively when he touched it. The baby's skin was cool, papery. Minute Jae had held guns that felt warmer. "Call the American," he said. "The one from Stanford that Dr. Park recommended." "Sir, we already consulted with Stanford." Dr. Martinez reviewed all the files remotely. She said. "I don't care what she said remotely." Minute Jae's voice cracked like ice. "Bring her here." Offer her whatever she wants. 10 million won. 20 million. Bring her to Seoul and make her look at my son with her own eyes. Choi hesitated, which was dangerous, but he'd earned the right to speak truth. Boss, we've brought in 10 specialists. We've spent over 3 billion won. They all say nothing. The shout echoed in the nursery, and Seo-jun flinched, a tiny tremor of distress that immediately sent the monitors screaming. A nurse rushed in, one of the rotating team of 5 that Minute J kept on staff around the clock, each one costing more per month than a surgeon's salary. He stepped back, forced his hands open, watched the nurse check the 4-line, adjust the feeding tube, perform the rituals that kept his son hovering in this terrible space between living and dying. The Iron King, they called him in the streets. The man who never bent. The man who never broke. He was breaking now, alone in a nursery full of machines and money and failure, watching his heir waste away while the best medical minds in 2 continents took his fortune and gave him nothing but the same answer: we don't know why. We don't know how to stop it. We don't know. Minute J turned back to the window, to his city of glass and sin and power, and felt the terrible weight of being a king who couldn't save the only thing that mattered. Maya Thompson had seen wealth before, but she'd never seen it weaponized quite like this. The black Mercedes that picked her up from her efficiency apartment in Itaewon had leather seats that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, and the driver wore an earpiece and a shoulder holster he didn't bother to hide. The 30-minute drive to Gangnam was silent except for the purr of the engine and the quiet Korean conversation crackling through his radio, codes she didn't understand, but recognized as the language of violence held in check. The mansion gates were steel and stone, 15 feet high, cameras tracking their approach like predator eyes. She'd been briefed by Mr. Choi during a tense phone call the night before. The baby was 6 months old, failing to thrive despite extensive medical intervention. The father was a businessman who valued discretion and results. She'd understood the words he didn't say. She'd grown up in East New York. She knew what a businessman, with armed drivers and security gates, actually did for a living. The money he'd offered was obscene. 3 million won per week, cash, just to assess the child. If she could help, he'd triple it. She'd done the math on her rent, her student loans, the certification courses she couldn't afford, and she'd said yes before her conscience could talk her out of it. But now, walking through the marble entrance hall past men in tailored suits with dead eyes and hidden guns, she wondered if she'd just sold her soul for the price of her debt. A woman in a crisp medical uniform met her at the base of a spiraling staircase, introduced herself as head nurse Kim, and led her upward without warmth or small talk. The third-floor hallway was wider than Maya's entire apartment, lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her medical school education. At the end, double doors opened into what looked less like a nursery, and more like a private ICU. The machines hit her first. Cardiac monitor, pulse oximeter, feeding pump, 3 different 4-stands, a crash cart in the corner. Then the baby, a small broken thing in an expensive crib, and finally the man standing over him like a dark angel keeping vigil. Kang Minute J turned when she entered, and Maya felt the air change. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it wasn't carved from granite and exhaustion. His suit probably cost more than her car used to before it died. His eyes were black and flat and measured her like a weapon being evaluated for purchase. "You're the American nurse." Not a question. His English was sharp, barely accented. Maya Thompson. She didn't bow, didn't drop her eyes, walked past him and the 3 other people in the room, past Choi with his careful expression, and the 2 nurses, who stepped aside with deference that felt like fear. She went straight to the crib. The baby was dying. She could see it in the translucent quality of his skin, the way his tiny chest worked too hard for each breath, the profound stillness of a body conserving its last resources. She'd seen it before in the pediatric ward at Brooklyn General, in children whose parents couldn't afford the specialists, couldn't navigate the insurance nightmares, couldn't do anything but watch and pray. But this baby had everything money could buy. And he was still dying. "May I?" She gestured to the crib rail. Minute J's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Maya lowered the rail and reached for the baby, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from one of the Korean nurses, ignoring the weight of Minute J's stare on her back. She lifted Seo-jun with practiced gentleness, cradled him against her chest, felt the terrible lightness of him, the bird-bone fragility. "When did you last hold him?" she asked, not looking up. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. 3 days ago. The doctors said to minimize stimulation. Maya's hands tightened fractionally on the baby. She turned then, met the Iron King's eyes with her Brooklyn glare, the one that had faced down gang members in the ER and administrators trying to cut corners, and attending physicians who thought nurses were just furniture with medical degrees. "The doctors are idiots," she said. "And if you want your son to live, you're going to have to start questioning everything they've told you." Behind Minute J, Choi's hand moved toward his jacket. The nurses froze. Minute J himself went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded either violence or revelation. Then, impossibly, something flickered in those dead black eyes. "Show me," he said. Maya Thompson had seen wealth before, but she'd never seen it weaponized quite like this. The black Mercedes that picked her up from her efficiency apartment in Itaewon had leather seats that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, and the driver wore an earpiece and a shoulder holster he didn't bother to hide. The 30-minute drive to Gangnam was silent except for the purr of the engine and the quiet Korean conversation crackling through his radio, codes she didn't understand, but recognized as the language of violence held in check. The mansion gates were steel and stone, 15 feet high, cameras tracking their approach like predator eyes. She'd been briefed by Mr. Choi during a tense phone call the night before. The baby was 6 months old, failing to thrive despite extensive medical intervention. The father was a businessman who valued discretion and results. She'd understood the words he didn't say. She'd grown up in East New York. She knew what a businessman, with armed drivers and security gates, actually did for a living. The money he'd offered was obscene. 3 million won per week, cash, just to assess the child. If she could help, he'd triple it. She'd done the math on her rent, her student loans, the certification courses she couldn't afford, and she'd said yes before her conscience could talk her out of it. But now, walking through the marble entrance hall past men in tailored suits with dead eyes and hidden guns, she wondered if she'd just sold her soul for the price of her debt. A woman in a crisp medical uniform met her at the base of a spiraling staircase, introduced herself as head nurse Kim, and led her upward without warmth or small talk. The third-floor hallway was wider than Maya's entire apartment, lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her medical school education. At the end, double doors opened into what looked less like a nursery, and more like a private ICU. The machines hit her first. Cardiac monitor, pulse oximeter, feeding pump, 3 different 4 stands, a crash cart in the corner. Then the baby, a small broken thing in an expensive crib, and finally the man standing over him like a dark angel keeping vigil. Kang Minute J turned when she entered, and Maya felt the air change. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it wasn't carved from granite and exhaustion. His suit probably cost more than her car used to, before it died. His eyes were black and flat and measured her like a weapon being evaluated for purchase. "You're the American nurse." Not a question. His English was sharp, barely accented. "Maya Thompson." She didn't bow, didn't drop her eyes, walked past him and the 3 other people in the room, past Choi with his careful expression, and the 2 nurses, who stepped aside with deference that felt like fear. She went straight to the crib. The baby was dying. She could see it in the translucent quality of his skin, the way his tiny chest worked too hard for each breath, the profound stillness of a body conserving its last resources. She'd seen it before in the pediatric ward at Brooklyn General, in children whose parents couldn't afford the specialists, couldn't navigate the insurance nightmares, couldn't do anything but watch and pray. But this baby had everything money could buy. And he was still dying. "May I?" She gestured to the crib rail. Minute J's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Maya lowered the rail and reached for the baby, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from one of the Korean nurses, ignoring the weight of Minute J's stare on her back. She lifted Seo-jun with practiced gentleness, cradled him against her chest, felt the terrible lightness of him, the bird-bone fragility. "When did you last hold him?" she asked, not looking up. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. 3 days ago. The doctors said to minimize stimulation. Maya's hands tightened fractionally on the baby. She turned then, met the Iron King's eyes with her Brooklyn glare, the one that had faced down gang members in the ER and administrators trying to cut corners, and attending physicians who thought nurses were just furniture with medical degrees. "The doctors are idiots," she said. "And if you want your son to live, you're going to have to start questioning everything they've told you." Behind Minute J, Choi's hand moved toward his jacket. The nurses froze. Minute J himself went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded either violence or revelation. Then, impossibly, something flickered in those dead black eyes. "Show me," he said. Maya Thompson had seen wealth before, but she'd never seen it weaponized quite like this. The black Mercedes that picked her up from her efficiency apartment in Itaewon had leather seats that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, and the driver wore an earpiece and a shoulder holster he didn't bother to hide. The 30-minute drive to Gangnam was silent except for the purr of the engine and the quiet Korean conversation crackling through his radio, codes she didn't understand, but recognized as the language of violence held in check. The mansion gates were steel and stone, 15 feet high, cameras tracking their approach like predator eyes. She'd been briefed by Mr. Choi during a tense phone call the night before. The baby was 6 months old, failing to thrive despite extensive medical intervention. The father was a businessman who valued discretion and results. She'd understood the words he didn't say. She'd grown up in East New York. She knew what a businessman, with armed drivers and security gates, actually did for a living. The money he'd offered was obscene. 3 million won per week, cash, just to assess the child. If she could help, he'd triple it. She'd done the math on her rent, her student loans, the certification courses she couldn't afford, and she'd said yes before her conscience could talk her out of it. But now, walking through the marble entrance hall past men in tailored suits with dead eyes and hidden guns, she wondered if she'd just sold her soul for the price of her debt. A woman in a crisp medical uniform met her at the base of a spiraling staircase, introduced herself as head nurse Kim, and led her upward without warmth or small talk. The third-floor hallway was wider than Maya's entire apartment, lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her medical school education. At the end, double doors opened into what looked less like a nursery, and more like a private ICU. The machines hit her first. Cardiac monitor, pulse oximeter, feeding pump, 3 different force stands, a crash cart in the corner. Then the baby, a small broken thing in an expensive crib, and finally the man standing over him like a dark angel keeping vigil. Kang Minute J turned when she entered, and Maya felt the air change. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it wasn't carved from granite and exhaustion. His suit probably cost more than her car used to before it died. His eyes were black and flat and measured her like a weapon being evaluated for purchase. "You're the American nurse." Not a question. His English was sharp, barely accented. "Maya Thompson." She didn't bow, didn't drop her eyes, walked past him and the 3 other people in the room, past Choi with his careful expression, and the 2 nurses, who stepped aside with deference that felt like fear. She went straight to the crib. The baby was dying. She could see it in the translucent quality of his skin, the way his tiny chest worked too hard for each breath, the profound stillness of a body conserving its last resources. She'd seen it before in the pediatric ward at Brooklyn General, in children whose parents couldn't afford the specialists, couldn't navigate the insurance nightmares, couldn't do anything but watch and pray. But this baby had everything money could buy. And he was still dying. "May I?" She gestured to the crib rail. Minute J's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Maya lowered the rail and reached for the baby, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from one of the Korean nurses, ignoring the weight of Minute J's stare on her back. She lifted Seo-jun with practiced gentleness, cradled him against her chest, felt the terrible lightness of him, the bird-bone fragility. "When did you last hold him?" she asked, not looking up. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. 3 days ago. The doctors said to minimize stimulation. Maya's hands tightened fractionally on the baby. She turned then, met the Iron King's eyes with her Brooklyn glare, the one that had faced down gang members in the ER and administrators trying to cut corners, and attending physicians who thought nurses were just furniture, with medical degrees. "The doctors are idiots," she said. "And if you want your son to live, you're going to have to start questioning everything they've told you." Behind Minute J, Choi's hand moved toward his jacket. The nurses froze. Minute J himself went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded either violence or revelation. Then, impossibly, something flickered in those dead black eyes. "Show me," he said. "Find someone," he whispered to Choi. "Anyone. Before there's nothing left to save." Maya spent the first hour ignoring everyone in the room except the baby. She checked the 4 lines, read through the medication logs that head nurse Kim reluctantly provided, examined the feeding schedule, the supplement regimen, the carefully documented intake and output charts that looked more like financial ledgers than medical records. Minute J watched her with the intensity of a man who'd built an empire on reading people, and she felt his eyes tracking every movement, every frown, every time she paused to write something in the small notebook she'd pulled from her bag. The baby stirred against her chest, a faint mewling sound that barely qualified as a cry. She touched his fontanelle, felt the slight depression that confirmed dehydration despite the 4 fluids. His belly was soft but slightly distended. His reflexes were sluggish. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would alarm doctors looking at numbers on screens instead of the actual child in front of them. "How many medications is he on?" she asked, still studying the baby's face, the pale quality of his lips. 7, Minute J said immediately. "Reflux medication, a probiotic, vitamin D, iron supplement, a compound the gastroenterologist prescribed for motility, and 2 others for." 8, Maya interrupted, tapping the medication log. "There's an anti-nausea drug here. Ondansetron." "Who prescribed this?" Head nurse Kim cleared her throat. "Dr. Park added it 3 weeks ago, when Seo-jun began refusing some feedings." Maya's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone, opened the drug interaction app she'd used 1,000 times in the chaos of Brooklyn General's understaffed night shifts, and started entering medications. The baby squirmed slightly, and she adjusted him, let him find the crook of her arm where generations of infants had discovered the universal human truth that being held was sometimes more healing than medicine. "Tell me about his symptoms," she said. "From the beginning. Before all the specialists." Minute J moved closer, his presence like a storm front, but his voice remained controlled. "He was born healthy. 4.2 kilograms. He nursed well for the first 2 months. Then he started spitting up more than normal. The pediatrician said reflux, gave us the medication. It got worse. We saw a gastroenterologist at Arsan. More medications. More tests. He started losing weight. We went to Samsung Medical Center. They added the iron because his levels were low. Then the motility drug, because they thought his stomach wasn't emptying properly. And the anti-nausea medication. Dr. Park said the baby was showing signs of nausea from all the other medications. Maya looked up then, met Minute J's eyes with something that might have been pity if she'd been stupid enough to show pity to a man like him. He's being poisoned. The room went arctic. Choi's hand went inside his jacket. The nurses stepped back. Minute J's face became a mask of stone and murder, and Maya realized with a clarity that pierced through her exhaustion that she might have just signed her own death warrant with 3 words. Explain. The word was a blade. Not intentionally, she said quickly, keeping her voice steady, professional, the same tone she'd used to tell parents their children had cancer, had died, had suffered because someone somewhere had made a mistake. He's being over-medicated. The reflux medication reduces stomach acid, which means he can't absorb the iron properly. The iron supplement causes stomach upset, which looks like worsening reflux, so they increase the reflux medication. The motility drug interacts with the iron and the anti-nausea medication, creating a cascade effect that's essentially shutting down his digestive system. He's not sick. He's being made sick by the treatments. Minute J stared at her like she'd spoken in ancient Sanskrit. 10 specialists examined him. 10 specialists looked at test results and added medications to fix the problems created by the previous medications. Nobody stopped to ask if the original diagnosis was even correct. She shifted the baby, touched his cheek with her finger. He turned slightly toward it, the rooting reflex still present, still searching for comfort. When's the last time someone just watched him eat? Not checked a feeding tube, not measured output. Actually watched him nurse or take a bottle. The silence answered her question. He doesn't have reflux, Maya said, her voice soft but certain. He has a tongue tie. A posterior one, subtle enough that a busy pediatrician might miss it, but significant enough that he can't transfer milk efficiently. He gets frustrated, swallows air, spits up. It looks like reflux. But it's mechanical, not medical. It's a 10-minute procedure to fix it, and then you wean him off these medications one by one, and he'll eat like a normal baby. She looked down at Seo-jun, at his pale translucent skin, his tiny ribs, the monument to medical arrogance and expensive incompetence cradled in her arms. Your son isn't dying from a disease, she said to the man who ruled Seoul's underworld with blood and fear. He's dying from the cure. Dr. Park was summoned and dismissed within 20 minutes, his protests and credentials and defensive explanations crumbling against Maya's cold recitation of drug interactions and basic pediatric assessment. Minute J's face had remained stone throughout, but his hands had curled into fists when Park suggested that perhaps the American nurse was mistaken, perhaps her experience in Brooklyn's public hospitals didn't translate to the complexities of elite Korean medicine. The doctor left with his reputation in ashes and a severance payment that felt more like hush money, and Maya began the careful process of weaning Seo-jun off medications that had been slowly killing him under the guise of care. The tongue-tie procedure was scheduled for the following morning with a pediatric ENT specialist Maya trusted, one who worked at her modest Itaewon clinic, and didn't ask questions about why King Minute J's driver was picking her up at dawn. But that night, at 11:30, when the day nurses had gone home, and only the skeleton night crew remained, Maya sat in the nursery's leather rocking chair, with Seo-jun sleeping against her shoulder, and found herself not alone. Minute J entered so quietly she almost didn't hear him. He'd shed the suit jacket, rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows, and the careful armor of the Iron King had cracked enough that she could see the exhausted father underneath. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her rock his son, and the silence between them felt less like tension and more like a shared breath after drowning. You should sleep, she said softly, not wanting to wake the baby. He's stable. The night nurse can. I haven't slept in 6 days. He moved into the room, took the chair opposite hers, close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the 2-day stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. Every time I close my eyes, I see him stopping breathing. I see myself at his funeral, burying my son before I've even taught him my name. Maya had heard confessions before, in hospitals at 3 a.m., when pain and fear stripped people down to their raw humanity, but hearing it from a man who probably ordered executions over breakfast felt different. Dangerous. Intimate in a way that had nothing to do with the dim lighting or the sleeping baby between them. "He's going to be fine," she said. "In 2 weeks, you won't recognize him. He'll be fat and screaming and keeping you up all night for normal reasons." My father kept me up at night for different reasons. The words came out flat, without self-pity, just statement of fact. He believed children should be afraid of their parents. That fear created respect, respect created obedience, obedience created strength. I was 6 the first time he broke my arm. 9 when he locked me in a shipping container for 2 days to teach me about consequences. Maya's hand stilled on Seo Jun's back. She didn't speak, didn't offer empty comfort, just listened the way she'd learned to listen in nursing school when professors taught them that sometimes healing required silence. "I swore I'd never touch my son in anger," Minute J continued, his gaze fixed on the baby, on the tiny rise and fall of breath that had become his entire world. "I swore I'd be different. Better. But what's the difference between my father's fists and my neglect? I gave him everything except what he needed. I trusted doctors because they had degrees and reputations, and I almost killed him with my arrogance. You didn't know. I should have known." His eyes met hers finally, and the rawness there made her chest tighten. "You knew in an hour. You held him and you saw what 10 specialists missed. What does that make me? I can read a room full of politicians and smell their lies. I can predict market movements and police raids and rival family attacks. But I couldn't save my own son." Maya shifted Seo Jun slightly, felt his weight, his warmth, the miracle of his continued existence. Being a father isn't about knowing everything. It's about finding the people who know what you don't and trusting them to help. "You found me. That counts. I found you by accident." Choi remembered you from his nephew's clinic visit. "Luck? Chance? Not skill." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you were desperate enough to listen when someone gave you a name that wasn't attached to a fancy hospital or a 7-figure reputation. Sometimes the best medicine doesn't come in expensive packages." He almost smiled then, just a ghost of expression in the corner of his mouth. "You're very American. Optimistic. You're very Korean. Dramatic." She paused. "He's going to love you, you know. When he's older. When he understands that his father moved heaven and earth to save him. That matters more than perfection." Minute J stood, moved closer, looked down at his son sleeping in her arms with an expression that might have been wonder or grief or something unnamed that lived between them. "My father taught me that love was weakness. That caring about anything made you vulnerable." "Your father was wrong," Maya said simply. "Yes," Minute J whispered, and his hand, calloused and dangerous and gentle, touched his son's head with a reverence that made Maya's throat tight. "He was?" The tongue-tie procedure took 11 minutes. Seo Jun cried for 3 of them, then nursed from a bottle with an efficiency that made the ENT specialist nod with professional satisfaction, and Maya's eyes burn with vindicated relief. Within 48 hours, the baby had gained 200 grams. Within a week, his skin had lost that translucent quality, and Minute J had started sleeping in 4-hour stretches instead of standing vigil like a ghost haunting his own home. But Dr. Park Joon-ho wasn't ready to fade quietly into the background of his expensive mistake. He arrived on the 8th day unannounced, bypassing Choi's carefully coordinated security protocols by invoking his previous relationship with the family, striding into the mansion's foyer with the confidence of a man who believed his medical degree was armor against consequences. Maya was in the nursery, charting Seo-jun's weight gain and preparing to reduce the iron supplement now that his stomach could actually process nutrients, when she heard the raised voices echoing up from the first floor. "I don't care what some American nurse thinks," she discovered. Park's voice carried the particular condescension of men who confused credentials with intelligence. "I've been practicing pediatric medicine for 15 years. I trained at Seoul National University. I've published in peer-reviewed journals. And you're going to take the word of a foreign contract worker over mine?" Maya's hands stilled on her clipboard. She looked at head nurse Kim, who'd become progressively less hostile over the past week, as Seo-jun's recovery made Maya's competence impossible to dismiss. "He just called himself in. Dr. Park has treated the family for 3 years, Kim said carefully, her loyalty clearly torn between the doctor who'd hired her and the nurse who'd actually saved the baby. He believes he has access. He's about to believe differently." Maya handed Kim the clipboard and headed for the stairs. The confrontation was happening in Minute J's study, a room of dark wood and leather that smelled like expensive whiskey and old power. Park stood in front of the desk with his back to the door, gesturing with the aggressive certainty of someone who'd never been truly challenged. Minute J sat behind the desk with the stillness that preceded violence, and Choi stood near the window with his hand resting on something under his jacket. The child was suffering from a complex gastric motility disorder, Park was saying. The medication regimen was appropriate and evidence-based. If there were complications, they were impossible to predict given the child was suffering from a tongue tie and iatrogenic polypharmacy, Maya said from the doorway, her voice cutting through Park's rehearsed defense like a scalpel. "Which you would have diagnosed if you'd spent more than 5 minutes actually examining him instead of ordering expensive tests to justify your consultation fee." Park spun, his face flushing. "You have no authority to." "I have the authority of being right." Maya walked into the room, pulled out her phone, brought up the photos she'd taken of Seo-jun's mouth, the subtle posterior tongue tie that had been invisible to doctors looking at screens instead of patients. Posterior ankyloglossia. Textbook presentation. Causes inefficient feeding, excessive air swallowing, spit up that mimics reflux. First-year pediatric nurses learn to check for it. "You missed it." "I did not miss anything." Park's voice rose, defensive rage replacing condescension. The child presented with clear symptoms of gastroesophageal reflux disease. The medication protocol created a cascade failure that nearly killed him. Maya pulled up her drug interaction app, held it out so Minute J could see. "The PPI you prescribed reduced his stomach acid, which prevented absorption of the iron supplement you added. The iron caused gastric irritation, which you interpreted as worsening reflux, so you increased the PPI dosage. Then you added a motility agent that interacted with both medications, creating nausea. Then you treated the nausea with ondansetron, which slowed his already compromised digestion even further. Each medication was treating the side effects of the previous medication. You weren't curing him. You were burying him under layers of pharmacological incompetence. How dare you?" Park took a step toward her, and Choi moved away from the window with predatory speed. "Dr. Park." Minute J's voice was quiet, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Is what she's saying true?" Park's mouth opened and closed. His face had gone from flushed to pale, and Maya could see the moment he realized his reputation, his access to one of Korea's wealthiest families, possibly his entire career, was balanced on the edge of whatever he said next. "The medical situation was complex," he started. "There were multiple differential diagnoses to consider, and—" "Yes or no," Minute J interrupted. "Could a tongue tie cause the symptoms my son presented with?" The silence stretched. Park's hands clenched at his sides. "Theoretically, in some cases, a posterior. Did you check for it?" "The standard examination protocol doesn't always." "Did you check for it?" Minute J stood now, and the room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. No, Park whispered. But the likelihood of... You didn't check. Minute J walked around the desk with the careful control of a man containing an inferno. You prescribed 8 medications to my infant son without performing a basic physical examination. You took $3 million for consultations that consisted of ordering tests and adding prescriptions. And when a nurse with student debt and a Brooklyn clinic job diagnosed him in 60 minutes, you came here to defend your incompetence with credentials and arrogance. Mr. Kang, I assure you. Get out. The words were barely above a whisper. Get out of my house. If I ever hear that you've treated another child, if your name ever crosses my desk again, you will learn what happens when someone almost kills my son and then blames everyone but themselves. Park fled. Maya watched him go, her heart hammering with adrenaline and righteous anger, and when she turned back, Minute J was looking at her with something in his eyes that felt dangerous in an entirely different way. Thank you, he said simply. Just doing my job, Maya replied, but they both knew it was more than that now. Park left behind his leather medical bag in his hurried retreat, abandoned on the chair near Minute J's desk like evidence at a crime scene. Maya noticed it an hour later, when she came back downstairs to ask about adjusting Seo Jun's feeding schedule. The study was empty, Minute J having left for a meeting that Choi described with careful vagueness as business that can't wait, and the bag sat there in the afternoon light streaming through the windows, expensive leather monogrammed with Park's initials. She should have left it alone. Should have called head nurse Kim to return it, or told Choi to have it couriered back to Park's clinic. But something nagged at her, a dissonance she couldn't name, a feeling she'd learned to trust during years of night shifts when intuition sometimes caught what exhaustion missed. The bag wasn't locked. Inside were the usual tools of a pediatrician's trade: stethoscope, otoscope, reflex hammer, a tablet loaded with medical references. But tucked into a side pocket, wrapped in a pharmacy bag from a clinic she didn't recognize, was a bottle of medication with Seo Jun's name on the label. Maya pulled it out, read the prescription. Metoclopramide. Another motility agent, stronger than the one Park had already prescribed, dated from 2 weeks ago, but never mentioned in the medication logs head nurse Kim maintained with obsessive precision. She photographed the label, then searched the drug name on her phone, scrolling through contraindications and warnings until she found the section that made her blood turn cold. Contraindicated in infants under 1 year due to risk of severe neurological side effects including seizures and potentially fatal respiratory depression. Black box warning: do not use in pediatric patients. Her hands started shaking. She searched deeper, found case studies of infants who'd been given metoclopramide, the cascading organ failures, the brain damage in the ones who survived. This wasn't a medication that could be prescribed by accident. Every pharmacy database would flag it. Every medical reference would scream warnings. Park would have had to override multiple safety alerts to even get this filled. She was still staring at the bottle when Choi found her 20 minutes later. He took one look at her face and his hand went to his jacket. What's wrong? Maya held up the bottle with a hand that trembled despite her best efforts to control it. This was in Dr. Park's bag. It's prescribed for Seo Jun. It's a drug that's banned for use in infants because it can cause seizures and respiratory failure. Park never gave it to him because I got here first, but he had it ready. He was going to administer it. Choi took the bottle, read the label with the careful attention of a man trained to find threats in details. His face went carefully blank, which somehow felt more dangerous than anger. This would have killed him. Not immediately. That's the thing. Maya's nurse brain clicked through the pharmacology even as her hands shook. It would have looked like his condition was worsening. More breathing problems, possible seizures that could be attributed to metabolic issues, organ failure that could be explained by his underlying condition. It's the perfect murder weapon, because it looks like natural progression of illness. Especially in a baby already on multiple medications, already failing to thrive. Park did this deliberately. Park was paid to do this deliberately. The words came out harder than she'd intended, Brooklyn sharp, the tone she'd used when dealing with insurance companies trying to deny care to dying patients. Nobody prescribes this by accident. Nobody overrides this many safety warnings unless they are being compensated for the risk. Someone wanted Seo-jun dead, and they hired a doctor with access and credentials to make it look like medical tragedy instead of murder. Choi was already pulling out his phone, typing rapid-fire Korean that she didn't need to understand to know was summoning Minute J back immediately. But Maya's mind was racing ahead, connecting dots with the terrible clarity of hindsight. The medication cascade, she said. All those drugs Park prescribed. They weren't just incompetence. They were cover. He was systematically destroying Seo-jun's health so that when he finally administered the lethal dose, it would look like the baby had been sick all along. The specialists from Samsung and Asan were duped. They saw a failing infant and tried to help, but Park controlled the narrative. He controlled what tests were run, what medications were added. He was building a medical history that would make Seo-jun's death look inevitable. Who would do this? Choi's voice was flat, lethal. Who would pay to kill a baby? Maya met his eyes, saw the same realization dawning that was crystallizing in her own mind with ice-cold certainty. Someone who benefits from Minute J not having an heir. Someone close enough to recommend Dr. Park in the first place. Someone with access to the house, to the medical records, to the family's trust. The study door opened. Minute J stood in the threshold, his face a mask of controlled fury, and Maya knew from the look in his eyes that Choi had already texted him the essentials. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took the pill bottle from her hand, read the label with the terrible focus of a man watching his worst nightmares take physical form. Find Park, he said to Choi, his voice barely human. Find out who paid him. And find out who in my house recommended him 3 years ago. But Maya already knew the answer. She'd seen it in the way Choi had hesitated before calling Minute J. The way his hand had gone still on his phone. The careful, terrible recognition in his eyes. It was you, she whispered. You recommended Dr. Park. Choi's face was stone. 3 years ago. When Seo-jun was born. I thought, his voice cracked. I thought I was helping. Minute J turned slowly, and the look on his face was something Maya hoped she'd never see again. The gun appeared in Minute J's hand with practiced ease. A matte black instrument of finality that he leveled at Choi's chest with the steadiness of a man who'd killed before and would kill again. The study became a snapshot of betrayal frozen in time, the boss with murder in his eyes, the enforcer with his hands carefully visible and empty, and Maya standing between them with a pill bottle that had unraveled 12 years of loyalty in the space of a heartbeat. Boss? Choi's voice remained steady despite the barrel pointed at his heart. I recommended Park because his credentials were impeccable. Seoul National University, publications in pediatric journals, references from families I vetted personally. I thought I was protecting Seo-jun by finding the best. You thought. Minute J's finger rested on the trigger with terrible calm. For 12 years, you've been my right hand. You've stood beside me through territorial wars and police raids and attempted coups. And now my son almost dies because you thought. Wait. Maya's hands were still shaking, but her voice cut through the moment with nurse-sharp authority. Wait. If Choi wanted Seo-jun dead, why did he hire me? Why did he remember me from his nephew's clinic visit and bring me here when I diagnosed the problem in an hour? That doesn't make sense. The question hung in the air like smoke. Minute J's gun didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes, the analytical mind that had built an empire warring with the father's rage that wanted blood for his son's suffering. I don't know, Choi said quietly. I've been asking myself the same question for the last 5 minutes. Why would I sabotage my own plan? He looked at Maya with something that might have been desperation, or calculation, or both. Unless I'm not the one who paid Park. Maya's mind raced, connecting pieces with the methodical logic she'd learned in triage, when every second counted, and wrong conclusions killed people. Park had access for 3 years. He could have killed Seo-jun anytime in the first few months, when sudden infant death would have been written off as tragedy. But he waited. He built a complex medication cascade instead. Why? Because someone told him to wait, Minute J said slowly, the gun still trained on Choi, but his voice shifting from execution to interrogation. Someone who needed time. Who needed the death to look natural after multiple specialists had examined the baby. Who needed a paper trail, Maya finished. Medical records from the best hospitals in Korea showing a mysteriously failing infant. Consultations with internationally recognized experts finding nothing. It's not just about killing Seo-jun. It's about creating a narrative where Minute J looks incompetent. Where the great Iron King can't even save his own son despite unlimited resources. Where his empire is weak because he is weak. The study door opened without warning. They all turned, Minute J's gun swinging toward the entrance, and head nurse Kim stood in the doorway with a manila folder, and an expression of careful neutrality that suddenly felt like a mask Maya should have seen through weeks ago. I'm sorry to interrupt, Kim said in perfect English, her eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment, the gun, the pill bottle, the 3 people arranged like chess pieces at endgame. But I thought you should see Dr. Park's financial records. The ones I've been keeping for the past 18 months. She placed the folder on Minute J's desk, opened it to reveal bank statements, wire transfers, and photographs that Maya's brain processed in fragments. Park meeting with someone in a cafe, Park accepting an envelope, Park's bank account showing deposits of 50 million won at regular intervals. I've been working for Choi since before Seo-jun was born, Kim continued, her voice conversational despite the gun now pointed in her direction. Not the Choi standing in this room. His cousin. Choi Dae-sung's cousin, who's been living in Busan for the past decade, building a legitimate shipping business while waiting for his opportunity. Waiting for Dae-sung to inherit when Minute J's line ended. The words hit like physical blows. Maya watched Choi's face drain of color, watched understanding and horror war for dominance, as he realized his own family had used his recommendation, his trust, his love for his nephew, as a weapon against the man he'd served for 12 years. My cousin, Choi whispered. Jung-ho. Jung-ho, who graciously offered to help you research pediatricians when Seo-jun was born, Kim said. Jung-ho, who suggested you look into Dr. Park's impressive credentials. Jung-ho, who's been depositing money into my account for the past 3 years to monitor the baby's health, adjust medication dosages, and make sure the American nurse never saw the metoclopramide bottle until it was too late. She smiled then, a professional expression empty of warmth. You were supposed to find it tomorrow, after I'd administered it tonight. After Seo-jun had his first seizure, and we rushed him to hospital where Dr. Park would be waiting to helpfully document the tragic progression of his mysterious illness. But then you came down early. Maya's hand closed around her phone in her pocket, finger finding the emergency call button by touch, holding it down in the pattern that would silently alert the police. But before she could complete the sequence, Kim pulled a small pistol from her uniform pocket with the practiced ease of someone who'd carried it for years. I really am sorry, Kim said, and she almost sounded sincere. I liked you, Maya. You're a good nurse. But Jung-ho paid me 10 million won up front and promised me 50 million more when the baby died. That's enough to retire. To disappear. To start over somewhere people don't ask questions. Minute J's gun was still pointed at her, but Maya could see the calculation in his eyes, the angle that would risk the bullet passing through Kim and hitting Maya or Choi. The study had become a standoff, with a dying baby upstairs, and a nurse holding a phone, and a traitor holding leverage. The negotiation lasted exactly 45 seconds before it detonated into violence. Minute J's first shot took Kim in the shoulder, spinning her backward into the doorframe, as her pistol discharged wild into the ceiling. Choi lunged for Maya, throwing her behind the desk as the study erupted into chaos and gunfire, and the sound of boots thundering through the mansion's marble halls. They weren't Choi's backup. They were his cousins. Maya hit the floor hard, her head cracking against the desk's wooden leg, vision swimming as the world became muzzle flashes, and shouted Korean, and Minute J returning fire with the cold precision of a man who'd learned to kill before he'd learned to love. She crawled toward Kim's fallen body, nurse instinct overriding survival instinct, found the woman still breathing despite the blood spreading across her uniform. How many? Minute J shouted to Choi, ejecting his magazine and slamming in a fresh one with practiced speed. I count 8. Maybe 10. Choi had pulled his own weapon, was firing toward the hallway where shadows moved with tactical coordination. They are using the service entrance. Jung-ho must have been planning this for weeks. Months? The baby. Maya's voice cut through the gunfire, sharp with terror. Seo-jun is upstairs alone. Minute J's face went absolutely white. He looked at Choi, at the hallway filling with armed men wearing masks and tactical gear, at the impossible mathematics of fighting through 10 trained soldiers to reach the third-floor nursery before Jung Ho's people got there first. Maya watched the calculation happen in real time, watched the Iron King measure his empire against his son and find his power wanting. The panic room, Choi said. Second floor, behind the master bedroom. It has communications, medical supplies. It's a coffin. Minute J fired 3 shots in rapid succession, dropped one of the masked figures. They'll siege us in and wait us out or burn us out. And even if my men get here first, how many bullets fly through these walls while we are trapped inside? How many ways does my son die while I hide behind reinforced steel? More gunfire erupted from the back of the house. Glass shattered somewhere on the first floor. Maya heard shouting in Korean, the distinctive crack of a shotgun, the wet sound of someone choking on their own blood. Jung-ho hadn't come for negotiation. He'd come for a coup, for the complete dismantling of Minute J's operation, with his heir dead, and his boss either murdered or broken. There's another option, Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos. She pulled out her phone, showed Minute J the emergency call screen she'd activated during Kim's confession. I had it on the entire time. The police heard everything. Kim's confession, the gunfire, all of it. They are probably already en route. Minute J stared at her like she'd just announced the end of the world. You called the police. To my house. During an active shooting. I called them to save your son. Maya met his eyes with Brooklyn fire and no apology. Jung Ho's men are here to kill Seo-jun and take your empire. The police will arrest everyone in this house, but they'll also stop the people trying to murder a baby. And Jung-ho can't finish his coup if he's in handcuffs. They'll arrest me, Minute J said flatly. They've been building a case for years. My shipping manifests, my casino ledgers, my account records. Choi's cousin didn't just want my empire. He wanted it legitimized, clean, after the police dismantled everything I built and locked me away for 20 years. Yes, Maya said simply. They will. But Seo-jun will be alive. The words hung in the gunsmoke air like a judge's sentence. Choi was still firing toward the hallway, but slower now, conserving ammunition, and Maya could hear sirens in the distance growing closer with every second. Minute J looked at the doorway where his enemies were advancing, at the stairs that led up to his son, at the woman who'd saved his child and was now offering to trade his freedom for that salvation. Boss, Choi said urgently. We can still fight our way out. My men are 5 minutes away. We take Seo-jun, we go to the safe house in Incheon, 5 minutes of bullets and chaos with my son in the crossfire. Minute J's jaw clenched. 5 minutes where Jung-ae Cho's people reach that nursery first because they are already inside. 5 minutes of gambling my heir's life on my ability to shoot faster than 10 men with automatic weapons. He looked at Maya then, really looked at her, and she saw the moment the Iron King made his choice. Saw him measure his empire against his son's breath and find all his power, all his fear, all his criminal glory worth less than the chance to see Seo-jun grow up even if he couldn't be there to witness it. How do we do this? He asked quietly. Maya's hands were steady now, Brooklyn nurse meeting Korean kingpin at the intersection of sacrifice and love. You put down the gun. You tell Choi to stand down. You call your men and tell them not to engage the police. And when the police arrive, you surrender everything. The ledgers, the account numbers, the evidence they've been trying to build for years. You give them Jung-ho and his coup attempt and everyone involved. And you let them take you into custody knowing that Seo-jun will be protected, documented, safe. I'll never see him grow up. No, Maya said, her voice breaking despite her resolve. You won't. But he'll grow up knowing his father chose his life over power. That counts for something. The sirens were a block away now. Jung-ae Cho's men were regrouping in the hallway. And Minute Jae lowered his gun with the slow, terrible grace of a king abdicating his throne for love. The police came through the doors like a breaking wave, tactical units, in riot gear with rifles and flashlights, that cut through the gunsmoke like judgment rendered visible. Minute Jae stood with his hands raised, his weapon on the floor at his feet, while Choi did the same with the careful movements of men who understood that survival now meant surrender. Jung-ae Cho's soldiers tried to scatter, some attempting to flee through the back gardens, others dropping their masks and pretending to be household staff, but the police had surrounded the mansion with the efficiency of a trap that had been waiting years to spring. Maya was already running for the stairs before the first officer could stop her, taking them two at a time with her heart hammering against her ribs and a prayer on her lips that she'd been fast enough, that Jung-ho hadn't sent someone ahead, that Seo-jun was still breathing in his expensive crib surrounded by machines that couldn't protect him from human evil. She hit the third floor at a sprint, burst through the nursery doors, and found the baby exactly where she'd left him, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his entire world had just burned down to save his life. She picked him up with shaking hands, held him against her chest, felt his heartbeat steady and strong and alive. The monitors beeped their normal rhythms. The IV dripped clear fluid. He stirred slightly at being moved, made a small sound of infant protest, then settled back into sleep with the absolute trust of a child who didn't yet know that trust could be weaponized. The police found her there 20 minutes later, rocking in the leather chair with tears streaming down her face, while Seo-jun slept and dreamed of nothing darker than milk and warmth, and the sound of a heartbeat that wasn't his mother's, but was learning to be enough. They took statements. They photographed evidence. They found Kim alive, but unconscious, found Jung-ho trying to escape through a service tunnel, found the paper trail that connected Dr. Park to the conspiracy and Choi's cousin to 18 months of careful planning. The mansion became a crime scene, and Maya became a witness, and Seo-jun became a ward of the state until custody could be determined. But before the social workers arrived, before the lawyers and the prosecutors, and the media descended like locusts on the story of Seoul's fallen Mafia king, they let Minute Jae see his son one final time. He came to the nursery in handcuffs, flanked by two officers who watched him with the wariness of men guarding a leashed tiger. His suit was torn, blood on his sleeve from someone else's wound, his face carved with exhaustion and grief and something that might have been peace if peace could hurt this badly. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching Maya hold his son, and the silence between them was every word they'd never get to say. "May I?" he asked the officers, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the siege. They looked at each other, at Maya, at the baby sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had raged through his home. One of them nodded, A small mercy in a night of cruelty, and Minute J crossed to the rocking chair with his hand still bound. Maya stood carefully, turned so he could see Seo-jun's face, the healthy color returning to his cheeks, the weight he'd gained in 2 weeks of proper care, and love and medicine that healed instead of poisoned. Minute J looked at his son with an expression that broke something in Maya's chest, a father memorizing features he wouldn't watch grow and change, storing memories for decades of absence. "He's beautiful," Minute J whispered. "When he wakes up, will you tell him?" His voice cracked. He swallowed hard, tried again. "Will you tell him his father loved him more than power? More than empire? More than his own freedom?" "Every day," Maya promised, her own voice thick with tears. "I'll tell him every day until he's old enough to understand. And then I'll tell him again until he believes it." Minute J leaned forward slowly, telegraphing his movements for the nervous officers, and pressed his lips to Seo-jun's forehead with the reverence of a final blessing. The baby stirred, opened his eyes for just a moment, looked up at his father with the unfocused gaze of infant recognition, then drifted back to sleep with a small sigh of contentment. "Thank you," Minute J said to Maya, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that felt like a brand. "For saving him. For seeing what no one else saw. For being brave enough to call the police and end this before Jung-ho could finish what he started. For giving me the choice between my empire and my son's life, and for making it the easiest choice I've ever made." "I didn't do it for gratitude," Maya said softly. "I know." Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like love or regret, or the ghost of what might have been if their lives had been different, if he'd been a different man, if she'd arrived in his world under any other circumstances. "But you have it anyway. You have everything I can't give you except this, the knowledge that somewhere in a prison cell, I'll be thinking of you both. Grateful. Always." The officers moved forward then, hands on his elbows, the brief moment of mercy expired. Minute J straightened his shoulders, became the Iron King one final time, as they led him toward the door, toward the cameras and the charges, and the trial that would dismantle everything he'd built with blood and fear and ruthless ambition. He paused at the threshold, looked back one last time at the nursery that had become a battlefield and a confessional, and a monument to the price of loving something more than power. "His name means auspicious and talented," Minute J said quietly. "I chose it before he was born, hoping he'd be everything I wasn't. Everything I couldn't be." He smiled then, broken and beautiful. "Take care of my auspicious, talented son, Maya Thompson. Teach him to be better than his father." Then he was gone, led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, and the empire he'd ruled with an iron fist crumbled into evidence and testimony and legal proceedings that would take years to fully unravel. Maya stood in the nursery holding Seo-jun, watching the dawn break over Seoul's skyline, and whispered a promise to the sleeping baby and the imprisoned father and herself: he'll know love. He'll know sacrifice. He'll know that his father was a king who gave up his crown so his son could live free. If you want to see more stories about love, sacrifice, and the impossible choices that define us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't holding on to everything, it's knowing what to let go. "The real question," Kim said pleasantly, "is whether you shoot me and risk the sound bringing my back up from the kitchen, or whether we negotiate like civilized people."